Hi, I'm Joe Stark, creator of the fantasy adventure series The Unscarred. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Now, on to the show.
On the world of Faereyas, a god made flesh is born every 500 years. These beings are known as the Chosen, but the world will come to call one of them the Unscarred. The Unscarred, written by Joe Stark.
Chapter 14, Kallukah. Eric opened his eyes. He was seated on the floor in Peary's suite. Hawk sat opposite him in a leather armchair, reading a book. Seeing that Eric was awake, she carefully marked her page and set aside the volume as she smiled in greeting. "Hello there," said Hawk with a slight nod. "Good morning," said Eric as he stood and stretched. "Coffee?" asked Hawk. Eric smiled. "Yes, please," he replied as he took the open chair next to Hawk. Hawk mumbled a quiet incantation and a steaming mug of coffee appeared on the table beside her and Eric. Eric took a sip and sighed in satisfaction. "You'll have to teach me that spell," he said with a laugh. Hawk beamed. "It would be my pleasure," she replied with a smile. "Did you get any sleep?" asked Eric. Hawk shook her head in negative. "Too excited," she replied. "This is the first time I've ever been outside of the tower, so I'm taking it all in." Eric nodded his head in understanding. "How's Hoke?" he asked. "Still asleep last I checked," answered Hawk. "His wound is completely healed." Eric breathed a sigh of relief. "You'll have to teach me that spell too," replied Eric. Hawk nodded. "Interesting that the coffee spell took precedence over the healing spell," she remarked. Eric laughed. "It's morning," replied Eric in mock defense. Hawk laughed in turn and smiled as she regarded the young chosen. "Can I ask you a question?" Eric nodded as he sipped from his mug. "Did your meditations lead to any insights?" asked Hawk. "What do you mean?" asked Eric in return. Hawk thought for a moment before answering. "Hoke and I have a mission. We seek to restore the throne of Kartu and depose the pirate king Zaren Zaris. To do that, we must find the heir to the throne. The missing heir is in the Verdant Valleys, and you, Eric, are our way in. So we're with you," said Hawk. "Though I am curious, what is your plan here?" Eric let out a long, slow breath as he slouched in his chair. "Ian, the first chosen, told me I had to come here. First as a voice in my head, then later in a dream. He told me I would need the Ka in the days ahead." Hawk grimaced. "A voice in your head?" asked Hawk in apprehension. "It sounds bad when you say it out loud," conceded Eric. "For the average person, yeah, not good," agreed Hawk. "Though you are far from the average person, Eric. Tell me more." Eric thought for a moment. "The first time I heard his voice was when I faced the Chaos Mage during the battle with the Pirate King's army. The voice told me, 'He waits,' and in my mind I saw the tomb of Faldor." "The Ka Wizard King?" asked Hawk. "From the First Age?" Eric nodded and shrugged. "Then later in a dream I spoke with Ian. He again told me, 'He waits.'" Eric stood and paced for a moment before returning to his chair. He looked at Hawk. "What is my plan here?" he posed aloud. "I don't really know, Hawk. I'm following instructions I don't understand from a voice in my head. I'm trusting my gut and hoping that it's the best course of action." Hawk nodded in empathy. Perhaps better than any other person on the planet, Hawk truly understood Eric's predicament. To have such power thrust upon you, to be the one with the power to effect change, the weight of such a burden was heavy indeed. She reached out and took Eric's hand. "We'll figure it out," said Hawk reassuringly. Eric lowered his head. "But what if my gut is wrong?" he asked. "That can only be seen in hindsight," replied Hawk. "Learn from it. The past is for teaching, not dwelling." "Their only lessons have been those in pain, regret, and shame," said Eric quietly. Hawk remained silent, allowing Eric to work through the painful feelings at his own pace. "This power," said Eric. "I don't really know how to use it," he admitted. "I know spellcraft and such from my time on the Isle of Divinity, but some of the feats I've accomplished are a complete mystery to me. I don't know how I did it. When it happens, it comes about unbidden, as though understanding dawns upon me in the moment of need, and I act." "The battle against the Pirate King's army," said Eric, but he stopped himself short of continuing. Images of the battle flooded Hawk's mind. She suppressed a shudder at the memory of Eric's rampage through the enemy forces. "I was there," said Hawk suddenly. "Not physically, but in my astral form." Eric looked down in shame. "Then you know," said the young chosen. "You know what I am capable of." "I went into that battle determined to find a better way, and I failed," said Eric. "How do I make the world any better when violence is the first tool I reach for when diplomacy fails?" Hawk frowned. "You make the world a better place by ridding it of those that seek only chaos. Spare no pity or remorse for those scum, Eric," she replied. "They sold their humanity long ago." Eric nodded. "Thanks, Hawk. I appreciate you listening." "Any time," replied Hawk with a smile. "Why is this the first time you've ever left Terransay?" asked Eric, changing the subject. Hawk sighed and sat back in her chair. "Because I am too precious to lose," replied Hawk with an edge of anger in her voice. "I'm the heiress of Kellan," said Hawk. Eric gave her a quizzical expression. "Kellan was a powerful magician in the time of Helen," said Hawk, referring to the second chosen. "Her powers passed down through the generations within her line. I'm the current vessel." Eric remained silent, so Hawk continued. "Since I was a child, I've been told that it is my duty to help those in Terransay further their understanding of magic." "You carry your own burden of power," remarked Eric. "Indeed," replied Hawk with a nod. "The last vessel counted his life in centuries. Terransay can wait. I will return, and when I do, it will be on my terms," she declared. Eric studied her face. "Yet still you worry," said the young chosen. Hawk scoffed. "Any worries I may be feeling are surely manufactured by a life of being told that I mustn't leave," she countered. The door to Peary's suite suddenly opened, cutting off any further conversation on the subject. Peary stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "The time is soon," said the Poison Eater. Hawk nodded and stood. "I will rouse Hoke." She picked up the volume she had been reading. "May I borrow this?" asked Hawk. "You are my guest," replied Peary with a short bow. Hawk said her thanks and left to wake her brother while Peary set himself about his own tasks, leaving Eric to sit in solitude as he quietly considered Hawk's words. The courtyard was packed. News of the Unscarred had spread throughout Karasfon like a wildfire. Throngs of Ka had been filtering into the city throughout the night and morning. The Council of Elders sat in quiet repose. Wonder could be seen in more than one aging pair of eyes as they beheld the largest gathering Karas Din had hosted in decades. But one of their number was conspicuously absent. "Where is Quintus?" asked Hawk. "I don't know," said Peary. "He should be here." "Maybe he fears judgment for his actions," said Hoke. The Farron was resplendent in his newly completed black mantis armor. Peary shook his head. "What proof do we have? There is no body." Said Eric. "Well, I think I can get the body back." "Please don't," said Hawk with a laugh. Eric laughed in return as their Ka escort from the battle approached. "Unscarred," said a Ka warrior as he bowed to Eric. He cast a questioning glance at Hawk but said nothing further. "Make way for Mon Mutavi Kallukah," bellowed a deep voice. A dozen finely dressed Ka made their way through the crowd. The Mon Mutavi was a giant of a man. The Ka were a tall race, but Kallukah stood a full head taller than the men in his retinue. He carried himself with the grace of a warrior, light on his feet and with an economy of movement that bespoke of regular martial training. Hawk leaned in close to Eric and Peary. "What is a Mon Mutavi? A title?" Peary nodded. At the onset of the Second Age, the 7 tribes of the Ka were without a king. Each tribe had a Mutavi, or a big boss. The Unscarred named Dayton Unka the Big Boss, or Mon Mutavi of the Ka. Kallukah Unka is that man's descendant. Further talk was brought to a halt as Kallukah raised his hand, motioning for silence. People of Karas Din, his voice boomed over the crowd, echoing off the cliff walls towering overhead. You have all heard the news that the Unscarred has returned. Kallukah pointed to where Eric stood. But I do not see the Unscarred before me. I see an outsider that you would prostrate yourselves before. I see a threat to the Ka. Eric said nothing as an angry chorus of whispers ran through the crowd. You forget yourself, Kallukah, shouted a Ka warrior. You were not there to witness the power of the Unscarred. Kallukah roared in anger. You would question me, Danis. Your Mon Mutavi? Shouted Kallukah as he unlimbered 2 long swords from scabbards on his back. Eric stepped forward. Put the swords down and let's discuss this like reasonable men. We will discuss this as warriors, growled Kallukah as he leapt forward, his swords raised high in a killing stroke. Eric nimbly jumped away, parrying Kallukah's blade with his scabbard. Kallukah spun like an enraged bull, furiously attacking once more, only to again have Eric leap away at the last moment. What is he doing? Asked Hoke. He could finish this in an instant. Piri said nothing as Kallukah stopped to catch his breath. He's preserving a potential ally, replied Hawk, giving him an honorable way out. Are we done now? Asked Eric. Kallukah spat on the ground. Are you dead yet? Asked Kallukah. Eric nodded. Very well. He held his scabbard before him and drew the great blade. He stepped back and held his arms apart, sword and scabbard in his hands. You fight like a cow. Kallukah's head snapped up, his eyes wild with anger. Eric smiled. Moo. Oh, that pissed him off, said Hoke with a laugh. The Ka attacked with renewed fury, his blades flashing in the morning sunlight as he hammered away at his smaller opponent. Eric stood and met Kallukah's attack head-on. He effortlessly beat aside the larger man's attack as he studied his foe. Much was hidden by rage, but Eric could see another detail. A darkness within the Ka that grew with his anger, fueling itself into a raging conflagration of hatred. Eric had seen that darkness the night before in the Ka that had attacked Hoke. Quintus, thought Eric to himself as he quickly scanned the faces of the elders seated nearby. The Shadow Mage was still nowhere to be seen. Eric grunted in disgust with himself as he beat aside another onslaught. Quintus had enchanted Kallukah to create a diversion. The wily old Ka had run, but not before setting up this attack. Why, Eric thought to himself as he moved in rhythm with Kallukah, attempting to wear the larger man out. Clearly, Quintus believed Eric to be the Unscarred, so he knew Kallukah could not defeat him. But why would Quintus want Kallukah dead over allowing him to align with Eric? What threat did that pose? Eric knew he couldn't kill Kallukah, not if that was Quintus's intent, but the giant Ka showed little signs of tiring as he attacked again and again. Eric knew he needed to end this. Catching both of Kallukah's blades on his scabbard, Eric brought his sword down in a heavy stroke, striking just above the hilts and shattering the Ka's swords. Kallukah charged forward, breaking Eric's guard. The giant Ka wrapped his thick arms around Eric's waist and squeezed, attempting to break the smaller man's back. Eric placed his hands on either side of Kallukah's head and closed his eyes. Light to banish the shadows, said Eric as his hands began to glow. Dimly at first, but rapidly the light grew in intensity until both Kallukah and Eric were lost in the searing illumination. The light subsided slowly, leaving the people in the crowd blinking to clear their eyes. Eric and Kallukah stood facing each other, but it was clear that the fight was over. Kallukah staggered and took a knee as though dazed. Piri, Hawk, and Hoke rushed forward. Quintus enchanted him, said Eric as the trio approached. Hawk nodded. He set you up to kill the Mon Mutavi. Why? Eric shrugged. I don't know, but I wasn't about to do the old buzzard's dirty work. Kallukah groaned. What is all this, then? He asked as he looked around the crowded courtyard. Piri offered him a hand up. Easy now. You were enchanted, but the Unscarred has broken the enchantment. You are free now, said the Poison Eater. Your memories may be a bit hazy as a side effect, I'm afraid. Enchanted? Asked Kallukah, sounding confused. Suddenly his eyes narrowed. Quintus, he growled. Piri nodded. Yes, it seems he used you to create a diversion while he fled the city. Kallukah looked thoughtful for a moment, but stopped himself short. I must address the people. He again raised his hand for silence. People of Karas Din, I have not been myself before you today. No, I was controlled by another, betrayed by one of our own, a man not here today. Elder Quintus, let no Ka give him food, shelter, or assistance, lest you fall victim as I did. Kallukah turned and motioned Eric forward. If not for the agile mind and powerful skill of the Unscarred, I would now surely be among the spirits of our ancestors. For who can stand before the might of the Unscarred? No man. Kallukah took Eric's hand and raised it high. Eric the Unscarred, he proclaimed. Hawk raised her fist and shouted, Unscarred! As the crowd took up the cheer, Eric felt a profound sense of déjà vu as his attention was drawn past the crowd to the mountain peaks strewn along the horizon. Images from the vision of Faldor's tomb overlaid the scene before him. Those same peaks could be seen from the lost city of Karasin. Understanding suddenly dawned upon Eric. The entrance to Karasin wasn't hidden in some distant mountain valley. It was right here, hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow we shall host a feast in honor of the Unscarred, announced Kallukah. Eric turned toward Kallukah, Piri, Hawk, and Hoke. Is there somewhere we can talk? He asked. Kallukah nodded. Yes, follow me. He turned to the men of his retinue. Make the necessary preparations for the feast. We will retire to my personal chambers. Please ensure we are undisturbed. They followed Kallukah through the citadel as he led them to the Mon Matavi's personal chambers. He opened the heavy double doors to reveal a lavish suite. An antechamber opened into a terraced garden. Doorways stood open along the roofed walkways, their gauzy curtains gently swaying in the breeze. Several low couches were arrayed around a central brazier where a roaring fire burned. Please sit, said Kallukah, motioning to the couches. Eric, Hoke, Hawk, and Piri settled onto the plush cushions. The warmth of the fire was a welcome respite from the brisk mountain air. Let us speak plainly now, said Kallukah. Giving a short bow, he added, Unscarred, I must apologize for attacking you. Eric chuckled. No harm done, my friend. We all know it was Quintus controlling your actions. The real question here is why would Quintus want you dead, asked Hawk. He was a family friend, said Piri. You've known him all of your life. Kallukah sighed. I've hated you for much of my life, Piri. I'm seeing now that Quintus was behind that. He couldn't kill or control you, and he couldn't sway my father's opinion of you, so he bet on the future and swayed me instead. When Piri said nothing in return, Kallukah continued. My father loved you like a son. You. A farmer's child from an unknown village. But you were more than that. You were the first Ka mage to be seen since the time of Kadam the Mighty, capable of wielding real magic. And what did you do with it? Did you rain fire on Farron soldiers when they sacked our villages? Did you teach those butchers to fear the Ka? No. You and my father both did nothing. Our people were dying, and you did nothing. I hated you both for it, said Kallukah. Your weakness. Kallukah, began Piri, but stopped as the young Mon Matavi held up his hand as though pleading for patience. But everything changed when my father passed on, continued Kallukah. I remember I was happy at first. It was everything I had wanted. I was now Mon Matavi and I would lead our people to a glorious victory. But the reality of leading was quite different. You see, I met the people. I spoke with the farmers, the hunters, the teachers, and then I saw it. I had spent my youth idolizing heroes from the sagas. Father made sure I was educated, but still I managed to grow up with a sword in my hand. And I saw threats to our people, but only the threats you could solve with a sword. I didn't see the threats of famine, disease, or of simply slipping into barbarism. It nearly broke me when I realized how wrong I had been, that I could never tell him that he was right, that he did right by me, that I was just too damned thick-headed to see it until it was too late. But it's not too late for me to say it to you. I'm sorry, Piri. I was wrong, finished Kallukah, extending his hand. Your father knew, said Piri as he shook the Mon Matavi's hand. Kallukah nodded. Thank you for that. Now as to why Quintus wants me dead, he posed as he crossed the garden, stopping before a statue of a man seated on a throne. Faldor? Asked Piri, looking up at the giant likeness of the ancient Ka wizard king. Quintus truly seeks Karasin? The lost city has been, lost for thousands of years, said the Poison Eater. But it's not lost, is it, Kallukah? Said Eric. Kallukah looked to the ground. No, Unscarred, it is not. Piri looked astonished at the admission. Kallukah continued. The Mon Motavi have held the secret since the time of the first Unscarred. He bade us to keep it, and so we have. Somehow Quintus knew that I had this knowledge. He came to see me this morning, demanding that I tell him how to reach Karasin. When I refused, he unleashed his shadows upon me. I can remember it now, but it's like it was a dream. It was the enchantment, said Eric. It was wrapped around your mind, controlling you. Kallukah shuddered, his imposing stature making the gesture seem almost comical, but the look upon his face held nothing of joy. It was hell, said Kallukah. It felt like being locked in a box with only a keyhole view of the outside world. But even in that state, I remembered opening the way for him. He looked at Eric. I tried to stop myself, Unscarred, but I could not resist. Eric smiled. Wouldn't be much of a control spell if it allowed you to interfere. Where did Quintus discover this power? Asked Piri. The Pillars of the Dead, said Kallukah. He was obsessed with the sight of the ancient battle. Piri looked troubled by Kallukah's words, but said nothing in return. You said you opened the way to Karasin for Quintus. How? Asked Eric. The way is through here, Unscarred, said Kallukah as he worked a series of hidden levers behind the statue of Faldor. The giant effigy slid aside to reveal a set of stone steps descending into darkness. A piece of the darkness suddenly lashed out from the stairwell, knocking aside Kallukah as though he were a child. The Mon Motavi flew through the air, crashing into Piri and Eric, knocking them to the ground. Hawk remained motionless as she sat before the brazier. The darkness took on the shape of a man as it stalked forward. The shadow assassin raised its ebon hand and a long blade flowed outward, its tip poised to strike at Hawk as she sat frozen in place. Hawk slouched back in her seat on the couch, reacting on instinct as the shadow assassin lunged at her, its dark blade passing just inches over her face. Hawk swung his sword, but the blade merely passed through the shadow, leaving the creature unscathed. The assassin ignored the black-armored Farron as it continued to attack Hawk. Hawk mouthed an incantation and a spear of light erupted from her outstretched palm, impaling the shadow creature. It let loose an inhuman shriek and attempted to flee, but was held fast by Hawk's spell. She shouted and another shaft of light appeared and multiplied, forming a latticework of light around the assassin. Hawk closed her fist and the net began to tighten. The creature recoiled and shrank into itself as it tried to avoid the light. With another incantation, the net flashed and the creature was gone. She stood up from her seat and crossed the garden, slowly approaching the darkened declivity beside the statue. Hawk spoke a quiet incantation and a ball of light began to spin in the air before her. It crackled as it spun, blazing with the intensity of a star. With a thought, she sent the ball of light hurtling down the stairwell. A chorus of shrieks emanated from the stairwell as Hawk's spell obliterated the remaining shadow creatures where they laid in wait. Hawk smiled. Nice work. Hawk nodded and turned toward Eric, Piri, and Kallukah. Are you guys coming? She asked, motioning to the stairwell. Piri sat up, rubbing the back of his head. That was incredible! Eric fluidly leapt to his feet. Fast thinking, he said, complimenting Hawk's spellcraft. It's a common enough spell. Handy way to light your path to the commode at night. And apparently strong enough to roast shadow assassins, she added with a smile. Kallukah sat on the floor, a look of astonishment on his face. We are fortunate that the Unscarred keeps such powerful company. My father bid me to never open that door. Now I understand the severity of his words. And what were his actual words? Asked Piri as he looked down the stairwell, now illuminated by Hawk's spell. A single set of footprints could be seen in the thick dust. They led down the tunnel and disappeared into the lurking darkness that lay beyond the light's reach. He said it was a doorway that leads one to their death, said Kallukah. Nobody that has ventured in has ever returned. Eric stepped forward, blocking access to the stairwell. Listen, I can do this alone. There's no need for any of you to put your lives in danger, said Eric. Piri frowned. We're coming along. Hawk and Hawk nodded in agreement. Kallukah retrieved his black mantis armor and a pair of swords from a nearby room. Quintus entered the city of our ancestors. I plan on ensuring he never leaves. Eric nodded to his friends and led the way down the stairs. They heard a grinding sound from behind them as the statue of Faldor slid back into place, once again concealing the hidden entrance to the ancient city of Karasin. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like, share, and leave a 5-star review for the show. If you would like a copy of the Unscarred, please see the Amazon link in the show notes. Hardcover, paperback, and digital copies are all available right now. And if you want to email the show, hit me up at erictheunscarred@gmail.com.